So I asked for an exercise. So last time, the exercise that we need to do is basically to consider this competition scenario with a different game sequence. So first, the manufacturer 1 set P1 and the manufacturer 2 sets P2. So the way to do it would be extremely similar to what we have last time. So let me do it here. So demand 1 equals to 1 minus P1 plus BP2. Demand 2 equals to 1 minus P2 plus B multiplied by P1. And then the profit of M1 equals to, so I make the simple assumption that the production cost equals to 0 for both cases. So therefore, it is equals to P1 multiplied by D1, while for the M2 is P2 multiplied by D2. And then I do a shift enter. So what we have is exactly the same as what we have last time. So the only difference is in terms of the game sequence. So the game sequence, that means M1 first set P1 and then M2 sets P2. So when we try to solve for the game, we do a reverse order. So therefore, first, we want to find out what M2 should set the P2 to be. So we do the derivative. And then we solve for this game. Okay, so basically now, if M2 observe a retail price P1, then P2 would set a price 1 over 2 multiplied by 1 plus BP1. So here. So then in the first step, what should M1 do to maximize its own profit? Okay, what should M1 do to maximize its own profit, given that M2 would set a price like this? So we do the derivative again. So basically, if we take the derivative, this is equals to this large bunch. And then to make things simple, I can take a factor. So it looks like this. So then what should the optimal price be? So once again, we do the derivative and set that equals to 0. That helps me to know what is the slope. Okay, so now what we have is the derivative, which is the slope of profit M1. We want to set the slope equals to 0. So we are asking the question, what would P1 be in order for the slope equals to 0? So after we do shift enter, we have this particular value. So we have this. So even though that is negative, but remember that B is between 0 to 1. So therefore, this is the same as saying 2 plus B. Let me write down here. So if we take out the negative, so this is the same as here. Okay, so both expressions are the same. I just put a negative sign on top and a negative sign in the bottom. Then I have exactly like that. So what would P2 be? So this is this value, but then I want to have a factor, so it looks a little bit easier. Okay, so this one, once again, we can put a negative on top and negative in the bottom. Remember that, okay, so to make it easier, this is what I meant. So B is between 0 to 1. So therefore, we know that the price must be positive, okay? B is between 0 to 1. So the largest value, the numerator can be is 4 plus 2 multiplied by 1 minus 1. So that is positive, and then the denominator is also positive as well. And let's take a look at what is the demand. So factor D1, it looks like this, and factor D2, it looks like this, okay? And then factor profit M1, factor profit M2. So of course they are different. So let's try to compare with what we had from last time. So then from last time, those are the answers. Okay, so those are the answers from last time. So let me try to copy this and then put it here rather than call that to be P1. So let me call this to be simultaneous price decision. Okay, simultaneous. So SIM. So the spelling of simultaneous price decision. Okay, so I use as S1 sim and also P2 sim. So that means it's simultaneous. So let me continue to copy those formula. We also have DD1 and DD2. Okay, so let's say D1 sim colon equals 2. So this is simultaneous demand 1. So to make it easier, so let me get rid of the negative sign. So it looks like this. And then D2 simultaneous colon equals 2, which is the same thing. So I can just copy and paste. And then profit M1 simultaneous colon equals to this. Okay. And then remember that B is between 0 to 1. So, and we have a square here. So that is exactly the same thing. Okay. And then we have M2. So what, okay, let me delete this. And then I do shift enter, shift enter. So what I have done is to copy and paste the answer from last time, which is simultaneous. So the two prices, P1 and P2, are decided at the same time. So which is called simultaneous. Just in case if you wonder, this time it's called sequential. So this is sequential. So I am interested to compare what is the impact of price and on demand and on profit when the game sequence is different. Okay, to have an easier visualization display. So let me plot some picture. So then plot, so we have used plot P1, B01. Okay, so plot P1, B01, that means like the price P1. Remember that P1 is the sequential. Okay, we have set P1 earlier, which is this value. Okay, and that this value. And then I want to plot it as a function of E from 0 to 1. So then it looks like this. Let's try to compare between P1 and also P1 simultaneous. In order to put two pictures in the same place, you do a bracket and bracket. So that means you're plotting two different pictures. The first picture is P1, the second one is P1 sim. Okay, so P1 simultaneous. So P1 corresponds to this value, which is the sequential decision. And then P1 sim corresponds to what we had last class, which is simultaneous decision. And then if we plot this, shift enter, we have two pictures. The higher line is P1 sequential. The lower line is P1 simultaneous. What it meant is that when the two prices are decided simultaneously, so the price is smaller than when the two prices are decided sequentially. And we have four different prices, okay? Four different prices. We have P1 sequential, P1 sequential, P2 sequential, P2 sequential, P1 simultaneous, and P2 simultaneous. Well, P1 simultaneous and P2 simultaneous, they are the same. So I'm not going to plot both. The reason they are the same because they are identical firms. So they decide the price at the same time. So therefore, that is not surprising that they have the same. Therefore, that is not surprising that they would have the same price. So, but then I want to plot P1 and P2 sequential because one is the first mover, one is the second mover. So let's try to plot it here. And then we have this value. So the top line, the blue line is P1 sequential. The second line, which is the yellow line, the one I'm the mouse pointing to is P2 sequential. And the last line, P1, the pink line is P1 simultaneous, which is also P2 simultaneous. So we have some observation here. Let's do the same thing for demand. Okay, so right now I want to plot demand 1, B0, 1. So demand 1 would correspond to the time that the two firms set the price sequentially. And this is the first mover, D1. So we have this value. And let's try to compare this with D1 simultaneous. Okay, so that means when there's different game sequence, what would be the impact to the demand? We notice that actually the demand D1 sim looks like this. Okay, so D1 simultaneous looks a little bit higher, and then D1 is the blue line here. And let me plot D2 as well. Okay, so you can see I'm trying to plot side by side. Okay, so the top, the lower, so the first one is D1, P1, the second one is P1 sim, D1 sim, the last one is P2, D2. And then we have this picture. Okay, let me explain this picture. The blue line is D1, sequential. That means it's a sequential game. M1 first set the price. It have a lower demand. The middle one is D1 sim. That means the two firms set the price at the same time. And the top line is D2 sequential. That means M2 is the second mover. And then we have this picture. The last one would be profit. So what I have just drawn is under the sequential game, M1 would have this particular profit. Okay, under sequential game, M1 have this profit. Let's try to compare with simultaneous game. Okay, so I am trying to compare with this value. So this talks about the impact to a firm when it is the first mover in setting the price versus if this is if both price set at the same time. So the top line is M1 sequential, and then the lower line is M1 simultaneous, which is also M2 simultaneous. To be complete, let's try to plot M2 as well. and then we have M2 here. Okay, so we have 3 different graphs. So the top line is M2, the middle line, M2 sequential, the middle line is M1 sequential, and the lower one is M1 simultaneous. So basically, we have different picture. And then we are trying to compare between the game sequence. So what I want you to do is trying to come up with some reason, not mathematical reason, but logic, common sense, intuition about why the ranking of P1, P1 sim P2, the ranking of D1, D1 sim D2, and also the ranking of profit M1, M1 sim, and M2. So try to come up with some explanation and then explain to write it to me so that we can discuss next time.